11-year-old Zoe's asthma attack accelerates mid-flight as passengers watch in horror. Flight attendant Tiffany had thrown her emergency inhaler into the trash minutes earlier, claiming it was suspicious. Suddenly, Dr. Naomi Washington stands up, revealing she's not just Zoe's terrified mother, she's the airline's largest shareholder. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling, and subscribe for more stories about justice prevailing against all odds. Now, let's find out how a routine flight turned into a battleground for one mother determined to protect her child. Dr. Naomi Washington closed her laptop with a satisfied sigh. After 18 months of relentless research, 60-hour workweeks, and countless sacrifices, her groundbreaking paper on pediatric pulmonary treatments had finally been published in the American Medical Journal. As the youngest black female department head at Baltimore Children's Hospital, she had faced an uphill battle for recognition, but the publication validated what she had always known: her work saved lives. "Mom, are we really going?" Zoe bounced on the hotel bed, her braided hair adorned with colorful beads that clicked together musically. "No emergency calls. No last-minute surgeries." Naomi smiled at her daughter, heart swelling with love. At 11, Zoe already showed the same determination and intelligence that had propelled Naomi through medical school. Despite her severe asthma, Zoe maintained perfect attendance at her gifted program and never complained about the arsenal of medications she needed daily. "Yes, baby. 2 whole weeks in St. Lucia, just you and me. I promised, didn't I?" Naomi checked their suitcases one final time. The beachfront villa was booked, and their first-class tickets on National Airways awaited. For once, they would indulge. What Zoe didn't know. What nobody at the hospital knew, was that Naomi could easily afford this luxury. 3 years ago, when her husband Jerome had died from a preventable medical error clearly influenced by racial bias, the settlement had been substantial. Instead of purchasing a larger home or a fancy car, Naomi had made a strategic decision: she invested heavily in National Airways stock when the pandemic crashed prices. That investment had quadrupled, making her one of the airline's largest individual shareholders. "Remember your inhaler," Naomi reminded gently as they prepared to leave for the airport. "The primary and backup. And I've packed your nebulizer in my medical bag." "I know, Mom." Zoe rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I've had asthma my whole life." The Baltimore airport bustled with summer travelers. At the National Airways premium check-in counter, the agent, Vernon according to his name tag, glanced up with a practiced smile that faltered when he saw them. "First class?" he asked, looking pointedly at their casual travel clothes. "Yes," Naomi replied evenly, sliding her identification and confirmation across the counter. 2 tickets to St. Lucia. Vernon examined their documentation with exaggerated thoroughness. "And how did you book these tickets, ma'am?" "Through my executive account," Naomi replied, maintaining her composure though her jaw tightened. "I'm a Platinum Elite member." Vernon's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. And you're both traveling together?" "First class. Is there a problem?" Naomi asked, voice cool and professional, the same tone she used when junior doctors questioned her authority. "No, no problem," Vernon replied hastily, finally processing their boarding passes. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Washington." "Dr. Washington," she corrected. As they walked away, Zoe squeezed her mother's hand. "He was rude." "Some people make assumptions," Naomi explained quietly. "That doesn't make them right." At the security checkpoint, Naomi's medical bag received extra scrutiny. The TSA agent called a supervisor to examine the nebulizer and prescription medications, despite Naomi's medical license and documentation. Meanwhile, a white doctor ahead of them passed through with a similar bag, unchallenged. In the terminal, a woman wearing excessive perfume sat beside them, triggering Zoe's respiratory sensitivity. Naomi watched carefully as Zoe used her inhaler, counting the breaths as she'd done thousands of times before. Better? She asked when Zoe tucked the inhaler into her unicorn-shaped crossbody bag. Much better, Zoe confirmed, though her breathing remained slightly labored. When their boarding group was called, Naomi noticed the gate agent's surprise as she scanned their first-class tickets. Entering the aircraft, flight attendant Tiffany Jenkins greeted passengers with a bright smile that noticeably dimmed when she saw Naomi and Zoe. "Right this way," Tiffany said stiffly, not offering the customary welcome she'd given to previous first-class passengers. As they found their seats, Naomi reminded herself this vacation was about relaxation. She wouldn't let minor slights ruin their hard-earned break. She had no idea how drastically that would change in the next few hours. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces and plush leather seats. Zoe's eyes widened as she slid into 3A, immediately pressing buttons to adjust her position. Naomi settled beside her in 3B, arranging her medical journals in the seat pocket. "This is amazing, Mom," Zoe whispered excitedly, testing each setting on her entertainment system. Across the aisle, a middle-aged white man in seat 3C smiled at them. "First time in first class?" he asked Zoe kindly. "Yes, sir," Zoe replied with the impeccable manners Naomi had instilled in her. "I'm Elliot Bennett," he introduced himself, extending a hand first to Zoe, then to Naomi. "I fly this route monthly. The Caribbean service on National is excellent. Dr. Naomi Washington, and this is my daughter Zoe." Naomi shook his hand, appreciating his friendliness. First impressions mattered, especially in spaces where people like her were still seen as interlopers. The remaining first-class passengers boarded, mostly white business travelers and affluent-looking couples. Several nodded politely, though a few glanced at Zoe with expressions suggesting children didn't belong in premium cabins. Head flight attendant Bradley Sullivan, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, performed a final check before takeoff. "Welcome aboard," he said professionally, making eye contact with each passenger. Behind him, Tiffany Jenkins arranged welcome drinks, conspicuously skipping Naomi and Zoe. "Excuse me," Naomi called politely. "Could we get some water for my daughter? She needs to take medication before takeoff." Tiffany's smile tightened. "I'll get to you when I can," she replied, continuing to serve other passengers. Elliot, who had just received his requested bourbon, frowned slightly. "I believe the doctor asked for water for her child's medication," he said, his voice carrying. Tiffany returned seconds later with water, practically placing it on Zoe's tray table without acknowledgement. Through the pre-flight announcements, Naomi heard Captain Richard Hayes welcome them aboard the 5-hour flight to St. Lucia. The aircraft pushed back, and Zoe became engrossed in a movie as they took off. An hour into the flight, another flight attendant named Gabriella began meal service. When she reached their row, she consulted her tablet with a puzzled expression. "I'm sorry, Dr. Washington, it seems your special meal request isn't in our system." "That's strange. I confirmed it yesterday," Naomi replied. Tiffany appeared behind Gabriella. "We can only accommodate requests made 48 hours in advance," she stated flatly. Naomi maintained her composure. "I understand. Whatever you have available will be fine. I'll check if we have extras," Gabriella offered apologetically, shooting a questioning glance at Tiffany before moving on. Eventually, Gabriella returned with a standard meal for Naomi and a special allergen-free children's option she'd found for Zoe. "I'm sorry about the confusion," she whispered. As Zoe ate, Naomi noticed her breathing becoming slightly labored, the cabin pressure affecting her asthma. "Honey, I think you should use your inhaler again." Zoe nodded, reaching for her bag under the seat. "I put it in my backpack when we boarded," she said, looking concerned. "I'll get it," Naomi unbuckled and stood, carefully retrieving Zoe's colorful backpack from the overhead compartment. As she handed it to Zoe, she noticed Tiffany watching them with undisguised suspicion from the galley. Zoe found her secondary inhaler, a prescription-strength backup they rarely needed to use, and took 2 measured puffs. Tiffany approached as Zoe was mid-inhalation. "What medication is that?" she demanded, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "It's her prescribed albuterol inhaler," Naomi explained calmly. "My daughter has asthma." Tiffany narrowed her eyes. "It's not in its original packaging. It's in a prescription carrier case," Naomi explained. "We keep it clean this way while traveling." Tiffany didn't respond but continued staring as Zoe completed her medication routine. After several uncomfortable seconds, she walked away without another word. An hour later, Zoe fell asleep listening to music. Naomi opened her laptop to review research notes, but her concentration was broken by voices from the galley. "Don't know how they afforded those tickets," Tiffany's voice carried despite her attempt to whisper. "Probably using someone else's miles." "Does it matter?" Gabriella's voice responded. "They're not bothering anyone." "I'm just saying, certain passengers don't belong in first class," Tiffany continued. "It changes the experience for everyone." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, choosing to focus on her work rather than confront the blatant prejudice. This vacation was for Zoe, and she wouldn't let anything spoil it. Still, a familiar knot of anger and hurt tightened in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced throughout medical school, residency, and even now as a department head. The constant need to prove she belonged. Little did she know, the real confrontation was yet to come. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their authority so blatantly that it made your blood boil? What would you do if someone put your child's life at risk because of their prejudice? Type 1 in the comments if you'd stand your ground no matter what, or 2 if you try to de-escalate for your child's safety. Like this video if you believe accountability should be non-negotiable, and subscribe to join our community fighting against injustice. Now, let's see how this shocking confrontation unfolds. 3 hours into the flight, Naomi needed to use the restroom. She glanced at Zoe, who had fallen into a deep sleep, her breathing finally even and relaxed. "I'll watch over her," Elliot offered from across the aisle, noticing Naomi's hesitation. "I have grandkids her age." "Thank you," Naomi replied gratefully. "I'll just be a minute." As she made her way to the first-class lavatory, Naomi noticed Bradley and Gabriella serving drinks in the main cabin. Only Tiffany remained in the forward galley, organizing a service cart. Inside the lavatory, Naomi splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the tension that had been building since they boarded. She was accustomed to microaggressions, the questioning looks, the subtle dismissals, but something about Tiffany's behavior seemed more targeted, more personal. When Naomi returned less than 3 minutes later, she froze in the aisle. Tiffany stood over Zoe, who was now awake and visibly distressed. The inhaler lay on the tray table between them. "What's going on?" Naomi asked, rushing forward. Zoe looked up with frightened eyes. "She woke me up, Mom." Tiffany turned, her expression hardening when she saw Naomi. "I was asking your daughter about this unlabeled container. Passengers aren't permitted to have unmarked medications." "That's her prescription inhaler, as I already explained," Naomi stated firmly, placing a protective hand on Zoe's shoulder. "She has severe asthma." "There's no prescription label," Tiffany insisted, picking up the inhaler. "How do I know what this really is?" "It's in a medical travel case," Naomi explained, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. "The prescription information is in her medical documentation, which I showed you earlier." "All medications must be clearly labeled and declared," Tiffany stated, clutching the inhaler. This could be anything. Several nearby passengers had begun watching the interaction. Elliot unbuckled his seatbelt, half rising from his seat. "This is ridiculous," Naomi said, her patience wearing thin. "That is FDA-approved albuterol in a standard inhaler. I'm a physician, and that's my daughter's life-saving medication." "Anyone can claim to be a doctor," Tiffany responded dismissively. Bradley appeared then, summoned by the escalating voices. "What seems to be the problem?" Before Naomi could explain, Tiffany turned to him. I found an unlabeled substance that wasn't declared during boarding. I've asked repeatedly for proper identification of the medication, but they're being uncooperative. That's completely false, Naomi countered, her voice rising despite her best efforts. She woke my daughter up while I was in the restroom and began questioning her about a prescribed inhaler that we've already discussed. Bradley glanced between them, clearly favoring his colleague's account. Ma'am, safety protocols require all medications to be clearly labeled. It is labeled, Naomi insisted. It's in a medical travel case, which is standard practice for frequent travelers with chronic conditions. Zoe's eyes had begun to water, whether from emotion or respiratory distress, Naomi couldn't immediately tell. She reached for the inhaler, but Tiffany pulled it away. This constitutes a security concern, Tiffany announced. As per airline policy, unidentified substances must be confiscated. That is my daughter's prescribed medication, Naomi enunciated each word clearly, feeling her heart race. You have no right to take it. Several passengers murmured in agreement. An elderly woman across the aisle spoke up, let the child have her medicine. This is absurd. Bradley placed a hand on Tiffany's shoulder, perhaps sensing the situation spiraling out of control. Maybe we should, but Tiffany had made her decision. With a performative flourish, she dropped the inhaler into the trash cart beside her. Safety protocols must be followed. If you continue to be disruptive, we'll be forced to divert the aircraft. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Naomi stood frozen, disbelief battling with fury. In that moment, she recalled Jerome's face in the hospital bed, how the doctors had dismissed his symptoms until it was too late. The same dismissal, the same arrogance, the same devastating consequences. You just threw away life-saving medication prescribed to a child, Naomi stated, her voice dangerously calm. I want your employee ID number, right now. Are you threatening me? Tiffany retorted. I'm informing you that your actions have endangered my child and violated multiple FAA regulations and ADA protections, Naomi replied with the precision of a surgeon. Your employee ID, please. The overhead speaker crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes speaking. I've been informed of a situation in the cabin. I want to remind everyone that disruptive behavior will not be tolerated, and could result in an emergency landing and law enforcement meeting the aircraft. Please comply with all crew member instructions. Naomi recognized the threat, she was being painted as the problem. Making a split-second decision, she sat down beside Zoe, taking her hand. It's okay, baby, she whispered, though it was far from okay. We have your other medications in my bag. Turning to Bradley, she spoke clearly but calmly. I am not being disruptive. I am advocating for my child's medical needs after your colleague disposed of prescription medication. I will be documenting this incident thoroughly, but I will not escalate further at this time. Bradley seemed relieved by her apparent surrender. Thank you for your cooperation. As they walked away, Naomi pulled out her phone, switching it to airplane mode before opening the Notes app. She documented the time, the names of the flight attendants, and a detailed account of what had transpired. Then she wrote a single additional note: contact Douglas Winters' office immediately upon landing. Douglas Winters was the CEO of National Airways, and as a major shareholder, Naomi had his direct contact information. But for now, her priority was Zoe's well-being. The primary inhaler was gone, and they were still hours from their destination. What Tiffany didn't realize was that she hadn't just picked a fight with an ordinary passenger. She had declared war on a mother who had already lost too much to systemic racism, a doctor who had fought through barriers her entire career, and a shareholder with the power to ground not just this flight, but careers. The cabin air grew increasingly stale as the Boeing 787 continued its journey over the Atlantic. 2 hours after the confrontation, Naomi noticed Zoe shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her breathing becoming more labored. The recycled air, combined with the stress of the earlier incident, was triggering her asthma. Deep breaths, honey, Naomi coached quietly, rubbing circles on Zoe's back. In through your nose, out through your mouth. My chest feels tight, Mom, Zoe whispered, fear evident in her eyes. Naomi reached for her medical bag stowed under the seat, mentally cataloging its contents. She had a stethoscope, oral steroids, and basic emergency supplies, but nothing that could fully replace the inhaler Tiffany had discarded. I'm going to give you a tablet that will help reduce the inflammation, Naomi explained, keeping her voice steady despite her growing concern. It won't work as quickly as your inhaler, but it will help. Across the aisle, elderly passenger Mrs. Sullivan watched with concern. Is she all right, dear? She asked quietly. She has asthma, Naomi explained. Her inhaler was misplaced. Mrs. Sullivan's eyes narrowed in understanding. I saw what happened. Disgraceful behavior. Zoe swallowed the medication with a sip of water, her breathing becoming more labored. Naomi pressed the call button, knowing they needed additional assistance. Gabriella responded, her expression changing to concern when she saw Zoe's condition. Is everything okay? No, Naomi replied frankly. My daughter is having an asthma flare-up, and her primary medication was thrown away by your colleague. I need to access our checked luggage where we have backup supplies. Gabriella hesitated. I'm not sure if that's possible mid-flight. Let me get Bradley. When Bradley arrived minutes later, he assessed Zoe with evident skepticism. She seems fine to me, he remarked, though Zoe's breathing had become audibly wheezy. She's not fine, Naomi insisted. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist. A lung specialist. She needs her medication. I'll check what's available in our medical kit, Bradley offered, clearly unwilling to acknowledge the severity of the situation, or his colleague's role in creating it. While he was gone, Gabriella returned, discreetly slipping something into Naomi's hand. I retrieved this from the disposal bin, she whispered. But it looks like it was damaged when it was thrown away. The inhaler's canister had been dented, rendering it unusable. Naomi felt a surge of gratitude for Gabriella's attempt, even as her anxiety increased. Thank you for trying, she said sincerely. The aircraft encountered a patch of turbulence, the sudden jolts exacerbating Zoe's distress. Naomi placed her stethoscope against Zoe's back, listening to the concerning wheeze in her lungs. Elliot, who had been watching the situation unfold, stood up and approached Tiffany in the galley. Though Naomi couldn't hear their entire conversation, Elliot's body language conveyed clear disapproval. Completely unacceptable treatment. His voice carried briefly as the cabin quieted. Tiffany's response was equally audible, she's clearly acting for attention. We see this kind of behavior all the time. Naomi felt a surge of anger but channeled it into care for Zoe, using every technique she'd taught countless parents in her practice. Focus on my voice, baby. Slow, steady breaths. Bradley returned with the aircraft's emergency medical kit, which Naomi knew contained only basic supplies. She requested the oral bronchodilator, administered it to Zoe, and continued monitoring her condition. I need to access our checked luggage, Naomi reiterated. We have a nebulizer and additional medication. That's impossible during flight, Bradley insisted. The cargo hold is inaccessible and pressurized differently. Naomi knew this was standard procedure but had hoped for some flexibility given the circumstances. Then we may need to consider diverting. My daughter's condition could deteriorate rapidly. Is it really that serious? Bradley asked, his doubt evident. We're only 3 hours from our destination. Before Naomi could respond, Zoe began coughing uncontrollably, her airways constricting further. The bronchodilator had provided minimal relief, and without proper intervention, Naomi knew what would happen next. Several passengers now watched with open concern. Mrs. Sullivan had moved to sit beside them, offering what comfort she could. Elliot remained standing, his presence a silent support. As Zoe's coughing intensified, her breathing became more labored, and Naomi recognized the signs of a full asthma attack beginning. The situation she had feared was now unfolding at 35,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. Zoe's lips began taking on a subtle bluish tint. Cyanosis, the medical term, flashed through Naomi's mind like a warning siren. Her daughter was no longer getting enough oxygen. "Mom," Zoe gasped between labored breaths, "I can't help." Naomi called out, her doctor's composure finally cracking. "My daughter can't breathe." Passengers throughout the first-class cabin turned in alarm. A businessman removed his headphones. A woman gasped. Elliot immediately pressed his call button repeatedly. The overhead speaker crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richard Hayes speaking. Is there a medical professional on board? Please identify yourself to the flight attendants immediately." Naomi raised her hand. "I'm a doctor. Pediatric pulmonologist. And this is my daughter having a severe asthma attack." Tiffany appeared from the galley, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern as she assessed the situation. "We should find another doctor," she suggested, glancing around the cabin. "Someone more qualified. More qualified than her mother who specializes in childhood lung conditions?" Elliot challenged incredulously. An elderly white man with silver hair stood up from several rows back. "I'm Dr. Walter Lewis, retired cardiologist. How can I assist?" He approached quickly, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. When Naomi rapidly explained her credentials and Zoe's condition, he nodded respectfully. "You're more qualified for this than I am, Dr. Washington. I'll assist however you need me." Bradley, now recognizing the gravity of the situation, declared, "We have a medical emergency. I need all passengers to remain seated unless they're medical professionals." Tiffany stood frozen, the reality of her earlier actions visibly dawning on her as Zoe struggled for breath. "I need the emergency oxygen," Naomi instructed, her voice steady once more as she shifted fully into physician mode. "And whatever bronchodilators are in your emergency kit." "I'll get them," Gabriella volunteered, rushing to retrieve the supplies. Bradley began documenting the emergency in his logbook, his earlier skepticism replaced by protocol-driven efficiency. Dr. Lewis helped clear the adjacent seats, creating space for Naomi to work. Passengers watched in tense silence as Gabriella returned with the emergency medical kit and portable oxygen. "Thank you," Naomi said, quickly administering oxygen to Zoe through the mask. "Zoe, honey, this will help. Try to take slow breaths." As she worked, memories of Jerome flooded Naomi's mind, her husband gasping for breath in the emergency room while doctors dismissed his symptoms as anxiety, not believing a black man's description of his pain until it was too late. The anaphylactic shock that could have been treated had killed him while medical professionals doubted his reality. She had vowed never to let such negligence harm her family again. The inhaler would have prevented this, Dr. Lewis noted quietly as he monitored Zoe's pulse. "Yes," Naomi confirmed, adjusting the oxygen flow. "The one that was confiscated and thrown away." Gabriella, assisting beside them, whispered, "This isn't the first time something like this has happened. There have been other incidents." "With Tiffany?" Naomi asked, not looking up from Zoe. "Yes," Gabriella confirmed. "But complaints never go anywhere." Bradley overheard this exchange, his expression troubled as he continued documenting the emergency. The makeshift treatment was helping, but Naomi knew Zoe needed proper medical attention. The oral medications and supplemental oxygen were temporary measures at best. "We need to land," she stated firmly. "She needs emergency room treatment and her proper medications." Bradley nodded, the situation now undeniable. "I'll inform the captain." As he headed toward the cockpit, Naomi continued her careful monitoring. Zoe's color was improving slightly with the oxygen, but her breathing remained dangerously labored. "You're doing great, baby," Naomi encouraged, squeezing Zoe's hand. "Help is coming." Dr. Lewis spoke quietly to Naomi. I've witnessed discriminatory treatment on flights before, but this is beyond unprofessional. It's potentially criminal negligence. Naomi nodded, focusing on her daughter while mentally preparing for what would come next. As a physician, her priority was Zoe's health. As a mother, her instinct was protection. But as someone who had lost her husband to medical racism, she also knew that accountability was essential, not just for justice, but to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Bradley returned from the cockpit. Captain Hayes is diverting to Atlanta. ETA 2 hours. Emergency medical services will meet us at the gate. 2 hours may be too long, Naomi replied, monitoring Zoe's increasingly labored breathing despite the oxygen. We need to implement additional emergency protocols. She adapted quickly, using her medical training to maximize the limited resources available on the aircraft. Dr. Lewis assisted while other passengers offered whatever help they could. One provided a small fan to improve air circulation, another offered a cooling pack from her cosmetic bag to help reduce Zoe's rising temperature. Throughout it all, Tiffany remained conspicuously absent, retreating to the rear galley. Gabriella continued providing assistance, her expression reflecting both concern for Zoe and embarrassment for her colleagues' actions. When Bradley returned to check on their status, Naomi made a decision. Taking him slightly aside, she spoke in a low, clear voice. I need to tell you something that I wasn't planning to disclose, she began. My name is Dr. Naomi Washington. I own approximately 7% of National Airways stock, making me one of the company's largest individual shareholders. Bradley's eyes widened in shock. I'm telling you this now because I want you to understand the severity of what's happening, Naomi continued. This isn't just about this flight. This is about a pattern of behavior that puts lives at risk and exposes your company to significant liability. Bradley struggled to formulate a response. Right now, my only concern is my daughter's health, Naomi stated firmly. But once she's stable, this incident will require a comprehensive response from your executive team. I suggest you document everything accurately. Bradley nodded, visibly processing this revelation as he returned to his duties. Naomi refocused entirely on Zoe, whose condition had stabilized somewhat but remained precarious. The next 2 hours would determine not just Zoe's immediate health, but the future of National Airways itself. How would you react if someone who discriminated against you suddenly discovered you held power over their future? Would you seek revenge, justice, or systemic change? Comment, justice, if you believe in accountability with purpose, or change, if you think transforming the system matters most. Like this video if you believe in using privilege to protect others, and subscribe to join our community fighting discrimination in all its forms. Now, let's see how Dr. Washington wields her unexpected power. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richard Hayes speaking, the overhead announcement began. Due to a medical emergency, we will be diverting to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Our estimated arrival time is approximately 2 hours. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened as we may encounter turbulence during our descent. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. A mixture of reactions rippled through the aircraft, sighs, murmurs of concern, and a few audible complaints about missed connections. Naomi registered none of it, her focus entirely on Zoe, whose breathing remained labored despite the emergency interventions. Bradley approached, his demeanor dramatically transformed since learning Naomi's identity. Dr. Washington, the captain would like to know if there's anything else we can do to assist before landing. Thank you, Naomi replied without looking up from Zoe. Please ensure the emergency medical services are fully briefed on her condition. Severe asthma exacerbation triggered by stress and inadequate medication access. Of course, Bradley nodded, adding hesitantly, I've informed Captain Hayes about the circumstances. Good, Naomi responded, finally meeting his gaze. I need to make some calls. Is the aircraft phone available? Yes, right away, Bradley hurried to provide the phone, handling it to Naomi with newfound deference. Naomi kissed Zoe's forehead. Dr. Lewis will monitor you for a moment, honey. I need to make a quick call. The retired cardiologist nodded reassuringly as he continued checking Zoe's pulse. We're doing fine here. Oxygen saturation is improving slightly. With the aircraft phone in hand, Naomi stepped into the empty row behind them. Her first call was to Douglas Winters, CEO of National Airways. As expected, she reached his executive assistant. This is Dr. Naomi Washington, she stated calmly. I need to speak with Douglas immediately regarding an emergency situation on flight NA429 to St. Lucia. I am a major shareholder. After a brief hold, Douglas Winters himself came on the line. Dr. Washington. My assistant says there's an emergency. Douglas, I'm currently on one of your aircraft that's being diverted to Atlanta because my 11-year-old daughter is having a severe asthma attack after one of your flight attendants confiscated and discarded her prescribed inhaler, Naomi explained, her voice clinical and precise. I will need you and your chief legal counsel to meet this aircraft when it lands. There was a moment of stunned silence before Winters responded. Of course. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Naomi provided a succinct account of the events, concluding with, this appears to be part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior that has been systematically ignored by your management team. I expect a comprehensive response. I understand. I'll be there personally, Winters assured her, the gravity of the situation evident in his tone. Is there anything you need immediately for your daughter? Ensure the best emergency medical team is waiting, and have a complete pediatric respiratory kit available, Naomi instructed. And Douglas? This isn't just about my daughter. I want a full investigation into how many other passengers have experienced similar treatment. After ending the call, Naomi made 2 more quick calls, one to her attorney and another to her colleague at Baltimore Children's Hospital who specialized in emergency transport of pediatric patients. When she returned to Zoe's side, the mood in the cabin had shifted palpably. Passengers had divided into distinct camps, some casting sympathetic glances toward Naomi and Zoe, others muttering about the inconvenience of the diversion. Tiffany had emerged from her self-imposed exile in the rear galley, now engaged in intense whispered conversation with Bradley. Her frequent glances toward Naomi suggested Bradley had shared the revelation about her shareholder status. Meanwhile, Gabriella approached with a notepad. Dr. Washington, I want to provide you with my contact information. I witnessed everything that happened with the inhaler, and I'm willing to provide a statement. Thank you, Gabriella, Naomi replied sincerely. That would be very helpful. Elliot leaned across the aisle. Count me in as well. What happened was inexcusable. One by one, several passengers offered to provide statements supporting Naomi's account. Mrs. Sullivan patted Naomi's hand. We saw everything, dear. We won't let them deny it. Captain Hayes made another announcement, flight attendants, prepare for descent into Atlanta. Ground crew has been notified of our medical emergency priority landing. As the aircraft began its descent, Naomi's phone pinged with an incoming email. Airplane mode hadn't blocked messages coming through the aircraft's Wi-Fi system. It was from Sarah Chen, National Airways Chief Legal Counsel, Dr. Washington, Mr. Winters has briefed me on the situation. We take this matter extremely seriously and will be conducting an immediate investigation. Please know that the company's response will be swift and appropriate. I will be accompanying Mr. Winters to meet your flight. Meanwhile, on the ground in Atlanta, airline staff scrambled to prepare for the emergency landing. Media had already begun gathering at the terminal, someone had tipped them off about the high-profile diversion. As the plane made its final approach, Tiffany finally approached Naomi directly. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible anxiety. Dr. Washington, she began stiffly, I want to express my concern for your daughter's condition. Naomi looked up from Zoe, whose breathing had stabilized but remained compromised. Thank you for your concern, she replied evenly. Though it would have been more helpful before you disposed of her medication. Tiffany's face flushed. I was following protocol for unlabeled substances. We both know that's not true, Naomi stated quietly. But right now, my only concern is my daughter's health. We'll address the rest later. The aircraft touched down in Atlanta with priority clearance, taxiing directly to a gate where emergency vehicles awaited with flashing lights. As promised, a full pediatric emergency team stood by. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Bradley announced. Please remain seated until our medical emergency passenger has been safely deplaned. Thank you for your cooperation and understanding. As the aircraft door opened, paramedics immediately boarded with a stretcher and equipment. Naomi provided a rapid, professional assessment of Zoe's condition as they transferred her to the stretcher. Mom. Zoe whispered through the oxygen mask, fear evident in her eyes. I'm right here, baby, Naomi assured her, gripping her hand. These people are going to help you feel better. I'll be with you the whole time. As they moved toward the exit, Naomi noticed two police officers boarding, standard protocol for aircraft diversions. But instead of approaching her as the disruptive passenger Tiffany had labeled her, they moved directly toward the flight attendant after speaking briefly with Bradley. Outside the jet bridge, a well-dressed man in his 60s stood alongside a younger woman with a tablet. Douglas Winters and Sarah Chen had arrived as promised. Dr. Washington, Winters stepped forward, genuine concern on his face. I'm deeply sorry about what's happened. We have a private medical room prepared and specialists standing by. Thank you, Naomi acknowledged briefly before turning back to the paramedics. Let's move. Her oxygen saturation is still lower than I'd like. As the medical team rushed Zoe toward the dedicated facility, Naomi caught a glimpse of the terminal. Beyond the police and airline officials, news cameras captured the scene. What had begun as a simple vacation had transformed into something much larger, a very public reckoning. For now, Zoe's health was all that mattered. But soon, Naomi would need to decide how to leverage her unexpected power, not just for justice for her daughter, but for systemic change that would protect others who didn't have her resources or platform. Behind her, the remaining passengers began deplaning, their vacation or business plans disrupted, their perspectives perhaps forever altered by witnessing the potentially deadly consequences of discrimination. The private medical room at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport hummed with activity as emergency physicians worked alongside Naomi to stabilize Zoe's condition. The pediatric respiratory specialist that National Airways had scrambled to bring in, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, nodded approvingly at Naomi's emergency interventions. You likely prevented a much worse outcome, Dr. Washington, she commented while administering the nebulizer treatment. Her airways are responding well. Zoe's color had improved, and her breathing, while still labored, was no longer critically impaired. Naomi held her daughter's hand, the relief evident in her exhausted eyes. You're going to be just fine, sweetheart, she assured Zoe, who managed a weak smile in return. Outside the medical suite, a different kind of emergency was unfolding. Douglas Winters paced the corridor, his phone constantly at his ear as he managed the cascading crisis. Sarah Chen, the airline's chief legal counsel, consulted with a growing team of executives who had arrived via the company's private helicopter. Airport manager Raymond Fisher approached Winters, his expression grave. Sir, we have a situation developing. The media presence is growing, and passengers from the flight are giving interviews. What are they saying? Winters asked, though he already suspected the answer. It's not good, Fisher confirmed. Multiple witnesses are describing racial discrimination and endangerment of a child. The story is already trending on social media. #FlyingWhileBlack is gaining traction. Meanwhile, in the main terminal, delayed passengers from Flight NA429 created additional tension. Some demanded immediate rebooking and compensation, while others were more concerned about the health of the young girl they had witnessed struggling to breathe. Police officers had taken statements from multiple witnesses, including Elliot Bennett, Mrs. Sullivan, and Dr. Lewis. What had begun as a routine response to a disruptive passenger report quickly shifted focus when the officers heard consistent accounts of Tiffany's behavior. "You're saying the flight attendant confiscated and discarded prescribed medication from a child?" Officer James Carter clarified as he interviewed Elliot. "Exactly what happened," Elliot confirmed. "Then when the child had an asthma attack, they acted like the mother was exaggerating. If Dr. Washington hadn't been a physician herself, I genuinely fear what might have happened." Tiffany Jenkins sat alone in an airport security office, her uniform jacket removed, looking significantly smaller than she had appeared on the aircraft. Bradley stood outside with the police, providing his official statement as head flight attendant. "Ms. Jenkins has had previous customer complaints," he admitted reluctantly. "But nothing ever came of them." Inside the medical room, Zoe had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her breathing finally normalized. Dr. Rodriguez confirmed she was stable enough to be discharged, though she recommended against continuing their journey immediately. "She needs rest and monitoring for at least 24 hours, she advised. "Any additional stress could trigger another episode." Naomi nodded, stroking Zoe's hair gently. "Our vacation can wait." A soft knock at the door announced Sarah Chen's entrance. "Dr. Washington. If you have a moment, Mr. Winters would like to speak with you. Your daughter will remain under Dr. Rodriguez's care." Naomi hesitated, looking at Zoe's sleeping form. "I won't leave her side," Dr. Rodriguez promised. "And we can call you immediately if anything changes." In a private conference room adjacent to the airport's executive offices, Douglas Winters stood as Naomi entered. Also present were Sarah Chen, Raymond Fisher, and a man Naomi didn't recognize. "Dr. Washington, thank you for meeting with us," Winters began. "First and foremost, how is Zoe?" "Stable," Naomi replied, taking the offered seat. "But she could have died today, Mr. Winters. I want to be very clear about that." Winters nodded soberly. "I understand. And there are no words to adequately express how deeply sorry we are." He gestured to the unknown man. "This is James Morrison, our Chief Operating Officer. We've been reviewing the preliminary reports, and what happened is completely unacceptable by any standard. Ms. Jenkins has been placed on immediate administrative leave," Sarah Chen added. "And we're prepared to take further action pending a full investigation." Naomi regarded them steadily. "This isn't just about one flight attendant, though she certainly bears responsibility. This is about a culture that enabled her behavior, that dismissed previous complaints, and that put my child at risk." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "We take all complaints seriously, do you?" Naomi interrupted. Because flight attendant Gabriella mentioned this wasn't Ms. Jenkins' first incident involving discriminatory treatment. Yet she remained in a position to endanger passengers. The executives exchanged glances, knowing they were facing not just an angry mother, but a major shareholder with first-hand knowledge of their operational failures. "You're right," Winters admitted finally. "And that's why we need your help." "My help?" Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Yes," Winters confirmed. "As both a shareholder and someone who has experienced this treatment directly, you have a unique perspective on what needs to change." Naomi considered this carefully. She thought back to the hospital where Jerome had died, how she had channeled her grief into advocating for policy changes rather than simply filing a lawsuit. The changes she'd helped implement had potentially saved countless lives. "I'm listening," she said finally. "We would like to launch a comprehensive review of our training, reporting, and accountability systems," Winters explained. "With your input and oversight." Sarah Chen added, "We're prepared to offer a settlement for what happened today, of course. But we sense you might be interested in something more substantial than financial compensation." Naomi thought of Zoe sleeping in the next room, of the fear in her eyes when she couldn't breathe. She thought of other children, other parents, who might face similar situations without her resources or platform. I want full access to your internal records of discrimination complaints for the past 5 years, Naomi stated. I want to review your training materials and help redesign them. And I want implementation of a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior with real consequences. That's extensive, Morrison began, but Winters cut him off. Agreed, the CEO said firmly. We'll make it happen. As they continued discussing terms, Naomi's phone buzzed with a news alert. The incident had gone viral, with passenger videos and testimonies spreading across social media platforms. National Airways stock had already dropped 3% in after-hours trading. There's something else, Naomi said, showing them the alert. This isn't going away with a private settlement. Too many people witnessed what happened. Winters nodded grimly. We're aware. Our PR team is drafting a statement, but honestly, we're open to your guidance on that as well. Naomi considered her options. She could leverage this moment for personal gain, or she could use it to create lasting change. The decision wasn't difficult. I'll help you draft that statement, she said. But it needs to acknowledge the broader issues of racial bias in air travel, not just this isolated incident. As the meeting continued, outside the airport's walls, the story continued gaining momentum. News vans gathered, social media exploded with hashtags like #JusticeForZoe and #GroundNationalAirways, and competing airlines began quietly implementing emergency reviews of their own discrimination policies. What had begun as a simple vacation had transformed into a potential watershed moment for how airlines addressed racial bias. And at the center of it all was a mother who had turned her pain into purpose, and a daughter whose interrupted journey might ultimately make travel safer for countless others. 1 week after the incident, Naomi sat in a glass-walled conference room at National Airways headquarters in Dallas. Before her lay stacks of internal documents, complaint records, training materials, and employee evaluations, that painted a troubling picture of systemic issues within the company. This is worse than I thought, she remarked to Sarah Chen, who had been assigned as her primary contact for the investigation. There are at least 17 documented incidents involving Tiffany Jenkins alone, dating back 3 years. All of them filed by passengers of color, all of them dismissed as misunderstandings or compliance with protocol. Sarah nodded grimly. The previous head of HR had a policy of supporting employees over customers almost unconditionally. We're finding similar patterns with several other flight attendants as well. On the television mounted on the conference room wall, a news anchor reported the latest developments. National Airways continues to face backlash following last week's viral incident involving Dr. Naomi Washington and her daughter. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack has generated over 8 million posts, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination during air travel. The company's stock has fallen 17%, wiping out nearly $2 billion in market value. Douglas Winters entered, looking like he hadn't slept properly in days. The Congressional Transportation Committee has requested documentation on our non-discrimination policies, he announced without preamble. And 3 other airlines have announced new anti-bias initiatives this morning. They're trying to get ahead of the story, Naomi observed. Exactly, Winters confirmed, taking a seat. Meanwhile, we're playing defense. Dr. Washington, I need your help more than ever. Naomi closed the folder she'd been reviewing. I've been examining these records all week, Mr. Winters. This isn't about one flight attendant or one incident. This is about a culture that normalized discriminatory treatment and buried complaints. I know, Winters admitted. That's why the board has approved the creation of a new executive position. Chief Inclusion Officer, with real authority and a direct reporting line to me. We'd like you to consider taking the role. Naomi hadn't expected this. I'm a physician, not a corporate executive. You're also someone who understands both sides of this equation, as a shareholder interested in the company's success and as someone who has experienced discrimination firsthand, Winters countered. Plus, your background in implementing systemic changes in healthcare settings is directly relevant. Before Naomi could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from the nanny watching Zoe. She checked it quickly, relieved to see it was just a photo of Zoe playing with their neighbor's dog. After the medical emergency, they had postponed their vacation indefinitely, and Zoe was still processing the trauma of the incident. "I'll consider it," Naomi said finally. "But first, I want to meet with the board of directors. They need to hear directly about what happened and what I've found in these records." Later that afternoon, in a boardroom on the top floor of National Airways Tower, Naomi stood before the company's 12 directors. Her presentation was clinical and precise, backed by data and first-hand accounts. "Gentlemen and ladies, what happened to my daughter wasn't an isolated incident," she concluded. "It was the predictable outcome of policies that allowed discriminatory behavior to go unchecked. The question now is whether you're prepared to make fundamental changes, not just cosmetic ones." Board Chairman Walter Preston, a silver-haired veteran of the airline industry, leaned forward. "Dr. Washington, we understand the gravity of the situation. But what specific changes would you recommend beyond what Mr. Winters has already proposed?" Naomi had anticipated this question. "First, a complete overhaul of your complaint system. Currently, complaints are handled internally with no transparency or external accountability. Second, mandatory bias training that goes beyond superficial diversity exercises. Third, a review of all terminated complaints with possible compensation for affected passengers. And finally, metrics tied to executive compensation, make inclusion a financial priority, not just a talking point." The boardroom fell silent as the directors absorbed her proposals. Some nodded thoughtfully while others appeared uncomfortable with the scope of changes suggested. "That's extensive," Director Elizabeth Harmon commented. "So is the problem," Naomi countered. Meanwhile, across town, former flight attendant Tiffany Jenkins sat in the green room of a popular talk show, nervously awaiting her segment. Her attorney had advised against the appearance, but the offer from the network had been substantial, and National Airways had terminated her employment 3 days after the incident. "We're ready for you, Ms. Jenkins," a production assistant announced. As Tiffany walked onto the set, the host introduced her. "Today we're talking with Tiffany Jenkins, the former National Airways flight attendant at the center of the viral incident involving Dr. Naomi Washington and her daughter. Tiffany, your side of the story hasn't been widely heard. What would you like people to know?" Tiffany cleared her throat. "First, I want to say I never intended to harm anyone, especially not a child. I believed I was following safety protocols regarding unlabeled medications." The host's expression remained neutral. Multiple witnesses, including other crew members, have stated that Dr. Washington explained the medication was her daughter's prescribed inhaler. "Why did you discard it despite this information?" As Tiffany struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further damage her reputation, back at National Airways headquarters, Naomi's proposal was gaining traction with the board. "If we implement these changes," Director James Wong inquired, "what metrics would you suggest to measure success?" "Reduction in discrimination complaints, increased reporting of incidents by bystanders and crew members, improved passenger satisfaction scores among diverse demographics, and ultimately, restoration of public trust as measured by both stock price and booking rates," Naomi replied without hesitation. Director Wong nodded approvingly. "You've clearly given this considerable thought." "I've had to," Naomi stated simply. "When systems fail people like my daughter, someone has to redesign them." As the meeting concluded, Douglas Winters walked Naomi to the elevator. "The board was impressed," he told her. "They're voting on your proposals tomorrow, but I expect full approval." "And the Chief Inclusion Officer position?" Naomi asked. "The offer stands," Winters confirmed. "With complete autonomy and authority as you requested." Naomi nodded thoughtfully as the elevator doors opened. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow. I need to discuss it with Zoe first. She's the one who paid the highest price for all of this." That evening, In their hotel suite, Naomi sat beside Zoe on the couch, explaining the offer in terms her 11-year-old could understand. So instead of fixing kids' lungs, you'd be fixing how the airline treats people? Zoe asked, her perceptiveness remarkable as always. Something like that, Naomi smiled. But it would mean some big changes for us. More time in Dallas, less time at the hospital. What do you think? Zoe considered this seriously. Would it help other kids like me? So they don't get their medicine taken away? Naomi's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's concern for others despite her own traumatic experience. Yes, that's exactly what it would do. Then I think you should do it, Mom, Zoe decided. But can I help too? Maybe talk to kids about what happened so they know what to do if it happens to them. Naomi hugged her daughter tightly, amazed by her resilience and compassion. That's a wonderful idea. We'll figure it out together. As Zoe fell asleep that night, Naomi checked the news one last time. The story had evolved beyond her family's experience to highlight a broader movement for accountability in the travel industry. Rival airlines were announcing new training programs, Congress was discussing hearings on discrimination in air travel, and National Airways competitors were seeing their stock prices rise as they positioned themselves as more inclusive alternatives. The corporate turbulence showed no signs of abating, but perhaps from this disruption, new, more equitable system would emerge, one that protected all passengers, regardless of their appearance or background. And perhaps Naomi Washington, who had entered that flight as a doctor and a mother, would emerge as something equally powerful, an agent of systemic change. 6 months later, a sleek private jet touched down at Baltimore Washington International Airport. The aircraft bore the newly redesigned National Airways logo, the traditional eagle now encircled by a globe representing inclusion and global connectivity. Dr. Naomi Washington, now Chief Inclusion Officer for National Airways, gathered her materials as the jet taxied to its private hangar. Her presentation to the International Aviation Summit had been received with standing applause, and several competing airlines had already requested meetings to discuss implementing similar reforms. Dr. Washington, your car is ready, the pilot announced over the intercom. And your daughter's school called, Zoe won first prize in the science fair. Naomi smiled, feeling the familiar surge of maternal pride. Thank you, Captain Johnson. And thank you for the smooth flight. The driver who met her was a recent hire through National's new Second Chance employment program, initiatives that had become hallmarks of the company's transformation under Naomi's guidance. How's the new protocols working out, Curtis? She asked as they drove through the evening traffic. Night and day difference, Dr. Washington, Curtis replied enthusiastically. The transparent complaint system means everyone knows they'll be held accountable. Makes for a better workplace all around. Since accepting the position, Naomi had split her time between Dallas headquarters and her Baltimore home, refusing to uproot Zoe completely. National had accommodated this arrangement, recognizing that the value she brought far outweighed the logistical complications. The company's comprehensive reforms had exceeded even Naomi's expectations. Every flight attendant, pilot, and ground staff member had completed intensive medical emergency and anti-bias training developed by experts in both fields. The new transparent complaint system allowed passengers to track the resolution of their issues, with independent oversight ensuring fairness. Former employee Tiffany Jenkins, after her disastrous talk show appearance, had undergone a personal reckoning, eventually becoming an unlikely advocate for workplace accountability. She now spoke at industry conferences about recognizing and addressing implicit bias. Most significantly, National Airways had established industry-leading standards for accommodating passengers with medical conditions. Zoe herself had helped design child-friendly materials explaining rights and resources for young travelers with health concerns. As the car approached their neighborhood, Naomi reflected on the unpredictable journey that had brought her here. What began as a traumatic incident had transformed into an opportunity for systemic change, not just for one airline, but potentially for an entire industry. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bradley Sullivan, who had been promoted to training director after his whistleblower statement about company culture. "You won't believe this. The FAA just announced they're adopting our medical emergency protocols as the new industry standard. Your work is changing everything." Naomi smiled, remembering the board meeting just last week where Bradley and Gabriella had presented results from their employee resource group for accountability. The data showed dramatic improvements in both passenger satisfaction and employee retention among diverse demographics. The car pulled up to her home, where Zoe waited on the porch, proudly holding her science fair trophy. Naomi embraced her daughter, marveling at her resilience and growth. "Mom, guess what?" Zoe exclaimed. "Remember Mrs. Sullivan from the plane? She sent me a letter congratulating me on the Young Advocates Award." The elderly passenger who had supported them during the flight had remained in contact, becoming something of a grandmother figure to Zoe. Similar connections had formed with other passengers who witnessed the incident, creating an unexpected community bonded by that difficult experience. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together, Naomi asked, "How do you feel about flying to Vancouver next month for the international conference? They want both of us to speak." Zoe considered this thoughtfully. "Will we be flying national?" "Of course," Naomi assured her. Captain Hayes specifically requested to pilot that flight. Captain Richard Hayes had undergone his own transformation. Initially defensive about his handling of the incident, he had eventually become one of the strongest advocates for the new protocols after completing the training program. "Then I'm in," Zoe decided. "Plus, I finished my speech about kids knowing their rights when traveling." Naomi marveled at her daughter's confidence, so different from the frightened child gasping for breath 6 months ago. The incident had changed them both, shifting their priorities and perspectives in unexpected ways. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Baltimore Children's Hospital for her weekly half-day of seeing patients. Though her primary role was now at National Airways, she had insisted on maintaining her medical practice part-time, unwilling to fully abandon the career she had worked so hard to build. In her office, she found a newspaper clipping left by a colleague. The headline read, "Family Files Discrimination Lawsuit Against Continental Airways After Medication Dispute." The article detailed an incident strikingly similar to what Naomi and Zoe had experienced. A black family traveling with a child who had diabetes had their insulin questioned and delayed by flight attendants despite proper documentation. The crucial difference? This family had been aware of their rights because of Zoe's widely shared educational video. They had recorded the interaction, clearly stated the relevant regulations, and received proper accommodation after initial resistance. The final paragraph noted, "The family credited resources created by Dr. Naomi Washington and her daughter Zoe for helping them advocate effectively during the incident." Naomi sat back in her chair, a complex mix of emotions washing over her. There was sadness that such incidents still occurred, but also profound satisfaction that the systems she had helped create were empowering others to protect themselves. That afternoon, she was scheduled to deliver a speech at the National Aviation Industry Conference. As she prepared her remarks, she reflected on the unexpected journey from that terrifying moment on the plane to her current position of influence. Standing at the podium before hundreds of industry leaders, Naomi began with the story they all knew, the incident that had gone viral and launched a movement. But then she took them further, sharing the behind-the-scenes transformation that had occurred since. "Transformative justice isn't about punishment," she explained. "It's about creating systems that prevent harm from occurring in the first place. It's about accountability that leads to growth rather than defensiveness. And most importantly, it's about centering the experiences of those who have been marginalized." As she concluded her speech, Naomi shared a video message from Zoe, who spoke with remarkable poise about her experience and the changes she had witnessed. "My mom always tells me that when bad things happen, we have two choices," Zoe said in the recording. "We can let them defeat us, or we can use them to create something better. What happened to me was scary, but look how far we've come." The conference erupted in applause as the video ended. Several executives approached Naomi afterward, eager to discuss implementing similar reforms at their own companies. That evening, As Naomi and Zoe boarded another National Airways flight for a weekend trip to visit Jerome's parents, they were greeted by a flight attendant who recognized them immediately. "Dr. Washington, Zoe, welcome aboard," she said warmly. "We have your medical information flagged in our system, and I've already notified the crew about Zoe's asthma. Is there anything else you need to make your flight comfortable?" As they settled into their seats, Zoe leaned over and whispered, "Mom, look how far we've come." Naomi squeezed her daughter's hand, thinking of all they had endured and all they had accomplished. What had begun as a mother protecting her child had evolved into a movement that protected countless others. The journey hadn't been easy, but the destination, a more just and accountable system, had been worth every difficult step. "Yes, baby," she replied softly. "Look how far we've come." What would you have done in Dr. Washington's position? Would you have used your power for personal compensation or systemic change? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating more equitable systems, whether or not we have formal power. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be inspired by Dr. Washington and Zoe's journey from trauma to transformation. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't just standing up for yourself, it's changing the system for everyone. This powerful story reminds us that fighting discrimination requires more than just personal resilience, it demands systemic change. Dr. Washington could have settled for compensation but instead chose to transform an entire industry. True justice isn't found in punishment alone, but in creating new systems that prevent future harm. The story highlights how privilege and power can be wielded responsibly. When Dr. Washington revealed her shareholder status, she didn't use it for revenge but for reformation. This teaches us that our greatest impact often comes when we think beyond our personal injuries. We also learn the importance of documentation and allies. From Gabriella's willingness to speak up to Elliot's intervention, these supporters helped validate Dr. Washington's experience and strengthen her case. This underscores how bystanders can become powerful advocates for justice. Perhaps most importantly, Zoe's journey from victim to advocate shows how trauma can be transformed into purpose. By creating educational resources for other children, she reclaimed her power and helped others avoid similar experiences. What racist experience have you witnessed or experienced that made you feel powerless? Comment below with your story or how you think we should address discrimination in public spaces. If this message of transforming pain into positive change resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more inspiring stories of resilience and justice. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the importance of speaking up against discrimination. Together, we can create a world where no one is denied dignity or safety because of their race.